Hey now, welcome to the dirty side of the track. It's America's leading Formula One podcast. I'm Brian. That's Rob. It's not a race week, but we have a banger of a show for you. Wouldn't you say, Rob?
Oh yeah, 100%. We've got another Vale's Tales coming, and really had fun digging into this one. A driver we both knew of, but didn't know a lot about, and now we know a lot more, and we're going to share it on today's show. But before we get there and do the big reveal, we'll hit some news and social. Oh my gosh, the wounds have been reopened.
God.
Oh my God, we touched on it last week that we knew that the big story coming out at the end of Monza was the safety car and that the rules had been followed this time, and wouldn't really take a Nostradamus to predict that the rest of the week on the Twitterverse was going to be reopening the Abu Dhabi debate.
At least one good thing came from it. There was one honest conversation about Abu Dhabi. It wasn't Buxton part of it on Twitter. It felt like there was at least one good conversation, but all the rest was crap.
There really was. In fact, I quote tweeted it because I saw it. This guy called Dave, I think his handle is like @DaveMusings or something, so he muses on all things F1. And he just kind of wrote this really, to the point, factual, no toxicity, no emotion, just basically said, I just want to address what happened in Abu Dhabi and why it was wrong because, and went do, and had about 7 or 8 tweets in a row. And he copied in Will Buxton and another who I can't remember because they didn't respond. And basically said, what do you guys think of it? You're the F1 journalist, you're on the inside. Do you agree with it, or is it just us on the outside as fans living in this bubble? And I thought, okay, no one's going to answer you. Although it was a really good, well-structured tweet, I thought, yeah, fair enough for trying, but it's not going to happen. And then Will Buxton replies, and basically goes along the lines of, basically, given how well you articulated that, I owe you the response in kind of the same thing, and did about 7 or 8 tweets in a thread going through this. It was great. And he basically just said, we don't swear on this podcast, but, stuff happens, and it has in every sport across the globe. Bad refereeing calls, bad refereeing decisions, they very rarely, if ever, lead to a game being replayed. If a referee doesn't call a goal or a touchdown or whatever they do in baseball with the running around the circle-y thing, it's bad calls that we as fans, we dine out on. Every time we go to the bar, we'll bemoan our luck. It depends which side of the coin you're on. If it happened to your team, you never let it go. If it happens for your team, you like to play that whole, well, what goes around comes around. Sometimes we'll be on the other side of the luck and sometimes we won't.
Well, and he also pointed out a few other things, which we talked about in our first ever podcast when we reviewed that race, where in the beginning, Lewis cut a corner when Max forced him off, but he went off the track and he gained an advantage, not a position, but an advantage, and never really gave that back. And there were a lot of other things to it, and it was nice to see sort of a fact-based discussion without people throwing piles of feces, and so it was fun. And then the rest of the Twitter sphere was piles of feces.
It was, but what that did inspire us to do was that we dropped our blog this week all about safety cars, so kind of tried to mix the two things together. A, the history of safety cars. Oh my gosh. I never realized they had a Lamborghini Countach.
I did not know that either until you found that. I had no idea. I'd seen all the Mercedes over the years and blah, blah. The Lambo. Sign me up.
I used to work, when I was at school, my summer job was to work at a Fiat garage. My stepdad worked at the Fiat garage and he got me a job there, and I was the valet manager. So yeah, I was in charge of cleaning the cars. But we had when the Fiat Tempra came out, it was supposed to be kind of like this.
I don't know what that
really,
is.
No, I know you won't. I know you won't. Look at the blog, look at the picture. It's supposed to be this cool Fiat car. It wasn't. It was a heap of junk. It ended up being a safety car, and there's a picture on the blog of Ayrton Senna hanging out the window of this Fiat Tempra, and I'm like, what? But the one that's on there, the one that was near and dear to my heart, I've mentioned it to you before, and you'd never heard of it, but Renault had a small hatchback called the Renault Clio.
I'm familiar with the Clio. Wait, time out. I'm familiar with the Clio.
I know the Clio. You didn't know the next.
Oh, I don't know this version.
Yeah. You didn't know that what Renault Clio also did, because Renault were in partnership with Williams. They dropped a Williams limited edition Renault Clio Williams, which was basically a car that was quite small and really shouldn't have the amount of power that it did for how small it was. I always wanted one of those. I was never going to be able to afford one, and more than that, I was never going to be able to afford the insurance premium that went with it. So, it was nice to go down memory lane of kind of learn some things about the safety car, and then at the end we kind of will let you go read it, but it was more to kind of look at the two views of safety cars. Should they be allowed to end races behind a safety car? So and I kind of sum this up with two songs. Do you go down the route of Bruce Hornsby in The Range of that's just the way it is? Some things never change, and you can finish behind safety cars? Or do we need to go for a Queen, Don't Stop Me Now, I'm having such a good time, and we need to find a way of not finishing behind safety cars? So anyway, go read it, check it out. It was fun doing it.
Or the third option is the Phoebe Buffet. Safety car, why are they hating you? And so on. I'd had a couple drinks when I put that out there last night.
I think you've had a couple now.
That's also true.
By the way, I put this in here as a note for us, Brian, because I'm really not sure if we have or we haven't. So we definitely covered Porsche and Red Bull getting together and, going to go to the chapel, going to get married. We're going to make amazing...
We covered Audi getting approved.
But we covered the news that Porsche have actually then left Red Bull at the altar and gone, no thanks.
No, we haven't. I mean, it just effectively was announced right around the race last week. That's wild, man. And the bigger, stranger part is Porsche being a part of Volkswagen and Audi being a part of Volkswagen, and Audi is in, maybe without, it sounds as though it'll be Sauber, but we'll see. But without that being confirmed, but then the other side of the hallway at Volkswagen, they're like, nah, we're not sure about this one now. Like, what? It just was very bizarre that they got so far down the aisle. There must have been some very serious deal breakers in there that would force them to walk away.
From the small bit that I read, and again, don't know how much is just the rumor mill in overdrive, was that Red Bull wanted to retain, I think Porsche were buying a 50% stake in it. Red Bull were going to retain all racing rights, but then I think that was getting chipped away at in the final discussions. And it may sound like Red Bull walked away, but again, I don't know if that's Red Bull just trying to save face, going, we dumped her.
Right. If it's unfortunate because I was really hoping we could see like a Max Verstappen in a 959. Is too much car for you? So a Porsche 959 was like the coolest car.
I know what a Porsche 959 is.
Okay. It's on my list of if I had a lot of money, go get one of those. And so had I seen Max driving one of those, like if they'd made a video and then like 80s-ified it, oh man, that would have been just tremendous to watch one of the best drivers ever.
Talking about cars and having a lot of money.
Oh God. Puro Sangue is how you pronounce it, I believe.
So Ferrari dropped their new car.
Their SUV.
Their new car. Let's introduce this. So they dropped their new car.
Their SUV.
They didn't really introduce it under any genre. You tweeted out on behalf of the dirty side, without asking permission from me, calling it an SUV, right? And we need the dirty siders to settle a debate, an argument here. So I'll just put my 10 pence forward. You can counter it with your 10 cents. I mean, pence are worth more than cents, so I'll win. But the way I know it, although I am willing to backtrack on this a little bit because it seems like it's not an exact science, is that an SUV tends to come from a truck-type chassis where you build it down to make it more car-like. So you start off with a big truck, off-roader, you build it down a little bit and basically put a car body shell on it, and voila, I have an SUV. And it tends to retain some kind of off-road capacity. Then that weird crossover thing came, which was kind of the opposite, when you start from a car chassis and you build it up to be more truck-like, but again, put some kind of off-road capability in there. I think this Ferrari, because it didn't start from truck, and it doesn't have off-road capability, I think it's more like the good old classic Grand Tourers that in Top Gear they would have taken all the way across Europe or whatever, which was the sports car that gets made a little bit bigger to be more comfortable and opulent for long distance, and they tend to upgrade it from a 2-seater to a 4-seater. I say that new Ferrari is a Grand Tourer, not an SUV. Discuss.
And I said it was a 456, by your definition, it would be a 456 jacked up with tiny suicide doors. It's not. It's an SUV. If the Urus is an SUV, then this is an SUV. And the Urus, you cannot make the argument, is based on the LMO2 platform, Lamborghini made tractors and trucks, the LMO2 and others. These are SUVs. And
well, I'm going to lean on our good listener friend Mark from Australia and say that GQ Australia said that Ferrari have launched their first ever four-door SUV-like Grand Tourer. So they said it's not an SUV, it's a Grand Tourer, but people keep calling it an SUV because they're wrong. So I love Australia, and I'm going to stay with them.
Well, all the reviews I watched, from CarWow to I think Shmee had one to, I don't know if DeMuro had one yet, but I watched a bunch of people I do actually enjoy their videos and respect. They all called it an SUV.
Lazy journalism. They're all going for the clickbait.
As I said, the thing's jacked up like an AMC Eagle. It is an SUV. We can.
You
move
can't
on.
take that thing off road though. Take a look at the picture of it. It's got no four-wheel drive capability.
My car doesn't have any four-wheel drive capability. I drive it in the snow. I mean,
But yours isn't an SUV.
No, but mine's not a snow car either. It's in the eye of
Okay,
the beholder.
Ding,
So I have a
ding,
question. Yeah,
Rob
moving
wins.
on.
No.
Rob wins? Okay, I have a question
No,
for
I'm
you
saying
then.
we'll throw it over to the
Yeah.
Twitterverse. Tweet us at F1 Dirty Side if the new Ferrari. Go and Google it. Take a look at it. Look at its spec. Is it a SUV, a crossover SUV, or is it a Grand Tourer,
Now you
or is
made
it
up a
something
middle
else?
thing? It's an SUV. It's an SUV. All right, Rob, question for you, buddy. Somehow, with this whole silly season deal kind of moving in slow motion now, Alonso puts it on steroids. It slows down now. We're waiting to see about Pierre. We're waiting to see about Colton Herta. And Mick is kind of in this weird limbo. And this last week, a lot of talk about Nico Hülkenberg as a candidate for Haas in 2023. And I want to talk about this because I have a serious problem with that. But before we do, when Daniel Ricciardo, another person who's looking for a chair, when Daniel and Nico were teammates at Renault, they did a bunch of like videos together. When team videos really got popular on YouTube, and they did one where Nico was trying to explain to Daniel how to pronounce his name. And I'm going to play that video now because it is worth it.
Hülkenberg.
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 Sag's mal ein bisschen männlich.
Hey,
Hülkenberg.
Hülkenberg.
Genau.
Nico Hülkenberg. Nico Hülkenberg.
So, I mean, I got a bunch of Nico sounds here I'm not going to go into. I don't understand. When we had the first conversation about who'd go into the seat at Aston Martin, and we talked about, the idea of Lawrence Stroll wanting a name. I said either you go for young talent or you go for an experienced veteran with, credentials. He's neither. And I have nothing against the guy, but he has the third most entries in a GP without ever making the podium. And actually without ever win, third most ever without a win, most ever without a podium. So it's just mind-blowing, like that all of a sudden he's in this conversation. Where did he come from?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I was digging around because I couldn't understand why Mick has actually outperformed K-Mag recently, and it's not like you've got this whole huge diversity. Like I think we said previously that it's not like if K-Mag was being Lando and Mick was being Danny, you'd see that big gulf and you'd understand it, but they're not. They're very, very side by side. Mick is obviously the driver for the future because he's younger, so if he's matching K-Mag at the moment, you'd think, well, I'd stick with Mick and maybe think about moving K-Mag on.
Right.
I went digging a little bit. It seems, as everything, that this could well be money related now. So Mick's not in the Ferrari Academy anymore, right? So he's not, I guess, under pressure to be in the Haas seat because it's not the Ferrari. I don't know if the Ferrari tie in there kind of keeps him there. Also, apparently, Mick brings a lot of money to Haas because of the one-on-one sponsorship that is to do with Mick. Now, there's a story doing the rounds at the moment that some big unnamed American superpower company is about to write a big fat old check to Haas to invest. So they won't need this one-on-one sponsorship money. I was like, okay, so fine. Mick's not a money seat only, I would say. He's not like a Latifi that is just bringing a checkbook and not bringing driving talent, right? So I still don't get why there's rumours about Schumacher not being there because, like you say, bring in Hülkenberg and what, you're guaranteeing that you're never going to get a podium finish?
Right.
I mean, I don't get it.
Third most races without a win and he has the most races without a podium. And again, he's a fine driver, right? And he seems like an okay guy. But what is it solving? You're not going for a young person who's going to develop into a champion, nor are you going with someone who has a ton of winning experience. It's just like a weird middle ground. And I don't.
Yeah, and on the rare occasions that the Haas has been good, both K-Mag and Schumacher have finished up there. So when Schumacher got his points, I think K-Mag's been in the points as well. So it's like, give these two a good car, they'll give you good results. Why are you guys in a rush to change your driver lineup? Just keep them together. They seem to have good chemistry.
The best part of the story, and let's close it here and move on, is that speaking of chemistry, Kevin Magnussen and Nico Hulkenberg hate each other with a passion. There's a famous where they bumped into each other a while ago, and this happened live after the race.
Once again, most unsportive driver of the
Suck
grid.
my
Yeah.
That's the two of them talking to each other in the interview pen. Most unsporting driver on the grid. Suck my mate. So, yeah, why would you do that? I mean, we've heard that, Pierre isn't tight with Esteban. If that were to come together, these guys actually hate each other.
Yeah.
But anyway.
Right, away from F1, but still in F1. My son told me we had to cover this, otherwise he was going to get angry at me because he started getting into the esports. So apparently, the first and second races of the season have taken place, and if only McLaren could swap esports for real world, because we've had the Bahrain race and the Imola race so far on Wednesday and Thursday, and Lucas Blakely of the McLaren Shadow has taken both wins. So McLaren are 2 for 2. Like I say, if only they could swap esports for real world, they'd be loving it. However, in a great little twist of things, and to link back to that amazing sandwich song that we love, Lucas Blakely of McLaren took the win, and his teammate finished third, and Mercedes reigning champion Jarno Opmeer was second. So therefore, Jarno was in a true Mercedes sandwich.
That's
because
right.
he was the filling between two McLarens.
That's right. And I've actually heard of Jarno Opmeer. I'm familiar with that person and their name. That's all I have for esports. I love the idea of it. I'm not able. My content, ability to take in content has reached its max, and I can't take in any more esports types things at this point. I'll save space for it.
I probably haven't got into it yet because I'm a bitter old man that has been born too early, and I'm so jealous of people that can make a career out of basically just playing on their consoles. Or
That's
their
the only
PCs.
thing from getting you your slice of luck pie, as you mentioned last week, was just the timing. You would be good enough, though, right? Yeah.
I mean, obviously, I'll be good enough, right? Obviously. That's without doubt. I mean, yeah.
Few videos to mention before we hit the Vale's Tales. So obviously we talked a lot about Nick DeVries, and we kind of talked about both sides of the discussion about whether or not he should have a seat. Obviously, a fantastic result. Someone on the channel, the Stigger, like the Stig from Top Gear, the Stigger, put a note out, DeVries' reaction to being driver of the day. And it was about 5 minutes of his Sky Sports, another interview put together. It was fun to watch how excited Nick was.
Just talking about DeVries, because we didn't really cover it last week, because I hadn't seen the footage until after we recorded the show. But if you really kind of want to see the difference, we talked about the blog last week about the step up of like the feeder series and F2 into F1. Now, you would have thought F2 has got pretty much similar kind of experience, G-force, all that kind of stuff. Did you see DeVries having to be helped out of the car because he basically his shoulders, his neck, and everything were just jello?
Yeah.
Or jelly, whichever one you want to say.
And
it's
he not a slice of luck pie.
He couldn't move. He couldn't get out of the thing. And I'm thinking, that just shows you that without the conditioning, because he'd been plucked that morning basically to come and race on to do qualifying in the race, he'd really had no kind of lead up to it. And the step up from F2 to F1 was just kind of that visible. I mean, it was insane.
Well, and we've talked about this before. Pato Award, when Pato did the test from IndyCar, did the test for McLaren, he was honest with Lando and explained to him that he had to have the padding put in the side of the car next to his helmet because he couldn't keep his head up after a session because of the neck challenge. So when people compare racing series, not even just formula to non-formula, but even within, it is very different. We had a C-squared challenge that actually dropped right at Monza, so I'll hit it here. It was an Italian food test with Carlos Sainz and Charles Leclerc. On the Ferrari channel, not bad. It was all in Italian, so so yeah, you could tell who won because the numbers the numbers were in American, but otherwise it was all in Italian. But it was good. But there was an interesting one as well that I found, and I really plumbed the internet for this one. So Charles Leclerc and Carlos Sainz took on 2 challenges with someone I'd never heard of before named Lizzie McIntosh. And I don't know who that is, but she asked them the truth or dare questions, and then they did a whisper challenge. It was fun to watch the two. It was a really well done job by Lizzie. I was curious, and so I checked some of her channel on YouTube. She actually walked around New York in, I think, Washington Square Park. I can't remember. I lived there for a while, and it looked like Washington Square Park. But asking people about Formula One, and no one had any idea what she was talking about. And it was hilarious. So anyway, just that was a good video if you want to check it out. And I'm sorry for all of the extra
Charles Chuck Leclerc
videos, but I'm not going to apologize, am I? No! All right, moving on.
Talking about like not having a clue about things, Vale's Tales this week. We are covering the career of the great Alberto Ascari, which we had both heard of, but we hadn't really gone and done any digging about. And when we went digging, man, there's a lot to find, despite the fact that it was a fairly short career in the end. But so that's what we're going to hit now. We're going to go over the life and career of Ascari, and my God, I enjoyed looking into this one, Brian. It was amazing to go digging. But before we get into Ascari, the man, how did you first hear about the name Ascari?
Yeah, so I suggest, this is so good, I suggest everybody curl up next to the fire. Bring your partner or spouse or friend, cat or dog, and get ready to learn about Alberto Ascari. How did we learn about him first? Well, you might ask. We actually, I heard about it from Ascari, the car manufacturer, on Top Gear the first time. They reviewed an Ascari A10, and they dropped briefly, named after the Formula One driver, and I moved on. I said, I'm not familiar with that guy. And it was kind of fascinating, just even the car manufacturer for a second, just to hit this, because it all ties in together. So it was a wealthy Dutch businessman who, named the company after an Italian racing driver. They were built in England, and they also created a racetrack, Ascari did, with replicas of famous corners. So now the car company is long defunct, long gone. It was been about 10 years. They no longer make the cars, but the track for the rich still survives. And you may say, yeah, so what? So hold on. I told you the cars were made in England. The facility in Banbury, if I pronounced that right.
Yes, you did.
Where they made the Ascaris is now Haas's European base. And the track that has the replica corners rang a bell for me, and I did a little research, and it was a Top Gear episode when they did the German, as they would say, saloons, we would say sedans. It was season 10, episode 10. And the reason I know that is because it was the M3, the RS4, and the Mercedes C63, and I had just gotten my first C63, and I watched that thing like it was my own car a million times over and over again. So I watched all this, I said, oh, this is good. We're leading into something good here as we start learning about Alberto Ascari.
Well, and before so I saw your note about the Top Gear one. I was like, I think I remember that. So I quickly Googled Ascari Top Gear. I ended up watching a completely different video, which was about the Ascari, I think, K71, which was one of their sports cars that they pulled out. And they went in a little bit more into the background. They basically said, if you want to enter the supercar market, you need a really fast car, B, it looks to look nice, and C, it needs to have some kind of heritage. So they basically said that because, like, Enzo Ferrari had obviously named his company after himself, and it had got this legacy and romanticism of like an Italian name. They basically went for Ascari because they were hoping it was going to conjure up that same kind of that feelings. They just plucked a name out to go, yeah, we're going to name our car after that because it's going to make us sound like we're about 100 years old, despite the fact we've only just formed the company. But anyway, let's talk about the man, the legend that they were trying to tap into when they named the car company after this. So, this was your choice. I'll let you take a lot of the lead on this, Brian, but there's just one piece I want to hit right at the beginning, which is that so he was the son of Antonio Ascari, who was a very, very good race driver, whose teammate was Enzo Ferrari. And I just want you to keep that in the back of your mind, because Enzo Ferrari, like some weird kind of like murder board with all the string being kind of connected about the place, is going to basically dip in and out all the way through Ascari's career.
Yeah.
And I ended up going down a rabbit hole of looking at Enzo Ferrari. So one day he has to be a Vale's Tales entry because that dude is really, really interesting as well. So, yeah, why don't you just kick us off on Ascari, Brian?
Yeah, thanks. So so I did select this. We'd heard a lot about him when we looked at Fangio, and if you haven't listened to our Fangio Vale Sales, you should go check it out. So Ascari was born outside Milan in 1918. As you mentioned, his father Antonio was a race driver, and sadly, Antonio died on track in 1925 in a French GP when Alberto was 7. And as you talked about, you're going to see Enzo come back and forth. Alberto loved motorcycles and raced these. He was signed to a team at age 19, and he had really just kind of really had this passion for racing, but it was about motorcycles. And Enzo Ferrari had stayed in young Alberto's life and eventually convinced him shortly after he signed with the motorcycle team to move from 2 wheels to 4. And he entered the Mille Miglia. I did that wrong.
Well, I mean, you pronounced that fine. I'm just waiting for you to pronounce the team that he raced for.
No, I was going to pass on that. But he raced too hard. We don't have names like that in America.
I'll give it a go. He raced in an Auto Avio Costruzioni. We'll go for that. Just mamma mia.
As good as I could do.
It's
so I
a
got
pizzaranga pie.
Yeah. But he raced there in a car supplied by Enzo Ferrari. And at this point, Ferrari hadn't started yet, so he provided him with a car, is what he did. And then he really got into racing 4 wheels regularly. And what is kind of fascinating is, as Enzo played a role in Alberto's life, there was another connection that he created, Alberto Ascari did, that also played a huge role in his life. And so around this time, Italy entered World War II. The family garage was now run by Alberto, but he was conscripted to service, and he was maintaining vehicles for the Italian military. He actually created a lucrative transportation business, supplying fuel to and other things to arms depots in North Africa. And his partner in this was, here's the next connection, Luigi Vioresi. Yeah?
Villaresi? I'm going to go for Villaresi. Yeah, let's go there.
All right. And so they started this business together, but they'd kind of known each other before. He was a racer as well. They had a wild time. They capsized in Tripoli, lost a shipment of trucks, but they survived it. They went through this war effort, and when it was over, when the war was done, Alberto got back to racing. And his teammate, when he got back into racing in the late 40s, was none other than Vioresi. And he became his mentor, teammate, and friend to Ascari. They were racing all over the north of Italy in Maseratis, having the best time. But Formula One wasn't even a thing yet. And that's kind of where it all starts getting ready to take off.
Yeah, I mean, it was like, just as the momentum of F1 is starting to build, he is absolutely kicking ass around all the non-F1 things. Between 46 and 49, Ascari is just developing these insane racing skills and winning all these different events all around Europe. Why have I taken over here? I've got another pronunciation effort here. So he won
a race.
No, we're going to try it. He won his first Grand Prix at the Gran Premio di San Remo in 1948. That
wasn't that hard.
And then took second place in this is easy now, the RAC International Grand Prix at Silverstone. So he's already kind of developing those skills that are going to really start coming to the forefront when F1 kicks in. But before we get to F1, I'm going to let you take the rabbit hole here, Brian.
This is so great. And so in 48-49, right, and a year before F1 is born, you got this guy, Alberto Ascari, who's kicking ass, as we just said, all over Europe. However, put your hat on and let's go to a different time. Travel with us in our time machine to a different time when these were not like highly paid, racing drivers. They were famous, but they weren't necessarily rich unless they were successful. Not like today, where people just train and have physios and trainers and dietitians and nutritionists. And so Alberto was a little bit on the chunky side. He was not fat. I saw pictures of him, and I thought it was BS. But some people were saying he was fat, but he was not skinny.
He fit nicely. He was snugly fit into his car, right?
Exactly. And his nickname was Ciccio, which means tubby, but in kind of a fun, loving way. So I realized like what would happen if we had a Ciccio on the grid today, and so I did a little research, and I do have a little bit of a SAP stat about this. SAP stat. And so if you look at it, there is an actual minimum weight for a driver to be, and it was established in 2019. I did not know that. It's 80 kilograms. Now, let me explain what I mean by minimum weight. So that's about 176 pounds. It doesn't mean the driver has to be 80 kilograms. It means you will be 80 kilograms combined with some ballast placed under your seat. And so you do not want to be over 80 kilograms because that's just extra weight. But anything under 80, they will true you up to 80 with weights so that every driver is effectively 80 kilograms going around. So they take that whole weight difference out. And it's fascinating that they do that. So they actually set the seat ballast under the seat in the footprint of the seat. And so if there were a 75 kilogram driver, it would be a 5 kilogram ballast, 80 kilograms heading out onto the track no matter who it is. And so being heavier than 80 would be a humongous penalty. And so when we joke, last week I joked, Alex Albon had his appendix removed so he'd be lighter on track. Well, they're going to have to put extra weight underneath them because of the loss of the appendix. So it didn't actually...
It's not a big organ. I don't think they have to add much.
Williams, they were taking paint off looking for whatever they could do. And then I said, well, who's the heaviest driver on the grid today? Because I'm curious. And as of March, they published the driver weights. And the heaviest driver on the grid this year is Nicky Latifi at 74 kilograms. So
at least he's winning something.
Oh, damn. I don't know if we can keep going after that. So let me close the non-F1 years. Back to Alberto. So he won another race in 49 for Maserati in Buenos Aires, but then he and his teammate Vioresi signed with Ferrari. Now Ferrari at this point had been established. I think it was 47. I think they were established.
I mean, this is a big leap of faith. I mean, these two are kicking ass in Maserati, and Enzo comes along and says, "I've got this new company that I set up like about 5 minutes ago. Come and race for me." And all he really had, apparently, he just basically went to them and said, Alfa Romeo are the team to beat, and we're going to beat them. I'm going to give you the car that can beat them, but I need your driving skills to beat them. And Ascari just kind of went, okay.
Well, the best part is, so it's Enzo's former teammate's son, and he talks to Ascari. He obviously has chops at this point, so it's not like he got a guy out of the blue. However, he brought his teammate. That's awesome. That's like when ESPN comes to me, and they say, Brian, we want you to do coverage of Formula One. And I go, well, can I bring Rob along? And they kind of go, oh, maybe, I don't know. And I get him there. So it'd be very similar to that. You're welcome. Yeah. And so anyhow, that brings us to the first Formula One season, 1950.
Yeah, and they made their debut. They do well, but not really amazing. They don't set the world on fire. Alfa Romeo win the title. We covered it last week about Farina, won the debut F1 year. I think, as you kind of pointed out, Brian, Ferrari got better as the year got on. The engine got much better as they got on, but it was too little too late. And is that really now, through the looking glass, Mercedes 2022? But, it proved it was getting better because 51 rolls around and Ascari in his Ferrari is 2 points behind Fangio in the Alfa Romeo. So going into the final race, Fangio wins it, takes home the championship, which is now Fangio's first, but Ferrari are absolutely knocking on the door. So why don't you take us into 52, Brian?
So we're going to hit 52 quickly here, and then I'm going to kind of talk about it again at the end. I just want to tell everyone right now, 1952, Alberto Ascari is one of the best seasons ever in Formula One. If you listened to our Jim Clark Vale's Tales, plug in that one too here. If you haven't, go do it. Clark's 1963 season is widely regarded as one of the best in Formula One history. I would say the 52 Ascari stands up to it. So first of all, he misses the first race of the 52 season. He's at Indy. He's the first European in the 11-year history of the Indy 500 to run Indy. Was it the 500 then even, or was it just Indy? I don't even know. After 40 laps, he had a wheel collapse. I don't know what that means. That sounds horrible. I checked it out, and it just basically says wheel collapse everywhere. But anyway, he gets back to Europe. He won 6 rounds of the series to clinch the world title. He also won 5 of those weird, we're going to get into these in the future, non-championship wins. And he had the fastest lap in all of these. And then he crashed in Monza in June, missed some of the remaining season, but he'd already taken enough points. He won his first F1 world title. And again, I'm going to hit 52 a little later. And then in 53, he won 3 more races consecutively to start the season. He put himself way ahead in it was only a 9-race season, and won his second world title in a row. And just one thing that's super important here that we really didn't hit. This was the first ever multiple world championship winner. I know that may sound obvious. Farina, Fangio, Ascari. It's pretty early on. But first one to do that. And the second thing that is amazing, he is the only Italian Grand Prix, Formula One drivers' champion born in Italy.
Yeah, and it goes some way to why he's held in such esteem by the Tifosi, because they've had a number of world champions, but they've only ever had one that is one of their own, and we'll cover it later as to quite how much he was held in esteem by Italy. But yeah, I mean, it's amazing. And then he, after retaining that title, he then moves to Lancia, and it's funny because we don't just take all of our source of information from Wikipedia. If we did, we would just say he had a salary dispute with Ferrari and he left and went to Lancia. That didn't ring true to me, because all this stuff about Ascari had been how he was a gentleman, he was full of morals, all this kind of stuff. I couldn't believe that it was a salary dispute. So I went digging a little bit more. And there's a number of different articles that actually say, as well as money, Lancia came into the sport and came knocking on his door. And when he saw the specification of the car that they were going to offer him, he was like, Ferrari are going to kind of stay static now and probably get caught by others. And I don't really want to just be knocking around for third and fourth. I want to be winning, and this car looks amazing. And the clincher, as a lot of these little, again, my murder board with all the strings linking up the dots. Who had designed this car for Lancia? Vittorio Jano, the man responsible for designing the Alfa Romeo that his father had driven all of his greatest triumphs in. I mean, I mean, it's
Vittorio Jano is the Adrian Newey of those days.
So he went across, he followed his heart. He's like, well, I trust this guy. He designed cars that gave my dad all of his greatest victories. I think they are onto something. It might take a bit of time, and it kind of did. Because the next year wasn't great, was it?
The first year, they barely had a car. It wasn't. I think they raced it twice, 3 times, something the whole year. It just wasn't ready. It was so bad. Lancia allowed him to drive twice for Maserati and once Ferrari that season in any car just so he could run, because they just weren't ready. It was basically a lost year. As a guy who came off of a double world champion, basically lost an entire year because the car wasn't up to snuff.
Yeah, and he was getting a lot of pelters for this at this point. Like the Italian press were criticizing him left, right, and center for leaving Ferrari, saying that he couldn't make Lancia competitive, and he just kind of just didn't get involved. Apparently, he was, the reports were he was just a modest, friendly guy, very polite, just ignored the press, just ignored it because same kind of just toxic journalism that we probably get these days on Twitter. He was able to just turn a blind eye and go, do you know what? I'm going to show you guys. And in 55...
Ciccio was just having something to eat.
Too busy tucking into his lasagna.
Yeah. We're terrible.
You've thrown me now. Where were we?
Yeah, 55.
55. So it started promising. The Lancia starts to show its potential. They take a few victories at the non-championship races. And there was kind of this thing going on now that, okay, Lancia maybe isn't the joke that it was going to be. And Ascari was absolutely killing it in this car all of a sudden. However, was reporting that the handling of the car wasn't fantastic, and it was basically taking every skill in his being to keep it on the track, which then kind of showed up in massive circumstances in Monaco in 55 as to quite how hard it was to keep on the track.
Yeah, I was blown away by this. So let's put a date out there. May 22nd. That'll be important soon. So May 22nd, 1955, Monaco Grand Prix. Late in the race, and Ascari is chasing a bunch of people down to try to get this, I don't want to call it a garbage can or whatever. It's just not handling well. He's chasing everyone down. So he's chasing down Sterling Moss for the win after Fangio had retired. He was unaware that Moss had also retired. But he's pushing. Ascari's pushing everything he's got. Late in the race, he actually crashed through some hay bales and sandbags after missing a chicane and went into the Mediterranean Sea. He went into the sea and sank. And there was an oil slick, and now this, I read a couple of different articles. I don't have a picture, but the sank, bubbles and steam came up, and then eventually his signature and famous pale blue helmet appeared on the surface. He was hauled out by a boat, and everybody who talks about it talks about the fact he had this terribly broken nose from this crash. He was in Monaco and drove into the sea.
He escaped with a broken nose. I'd be pretty happy with just.
I'd be pretty happy too. May 22nd, and so I'm gonna let you hit this next part because superstition is really important.
Yeah,
you got a better handle on this than I do.
And it'll come back round, actually, unfortunately, as we carry on going. But apparently, he was a really, really superstitious person. He had absolute terror of black cats. He would just actively he could be mid-conversation with you, and if he saw a black cat, he would just actively run to anywhere else where the cat wasn't. This is the one that's going to come back. He had a horror of, the word is Kabbalah, which is omens, bad omens of numerology. And he dreaded ever going anywhere near Montlhéry, which was the scene of his father's death 30 years before. So this guy's got all this stuff going on in his head, and he's not in a good space. He's just crashed into the sea. So he wants to be fit for Spa, which is only 2 weeks away, so he decides to take a little trip.
Yep, and now it's 4 days later, Thursday, May 26th, 1955. He decides to go to Monza because he was kind of restless, not doing anything the last 4 days. And a guy named Eugenio Castellotti, the Lancia team junior driver, a bit of a protege to Alberto, was going to test a car at Monza. And they were going to end up co-driving it in a 1,000-kilometer Monza race. And it was actually in a Ferrari. Lancia had given them special dispensation. And so he shows up there, Alberto does. He wasn't going to be driving. He's in a suit. And as the story goes, Castellotti came in, and Ascari, Castellotti, and Ascari's friend, Vioresi, his teammate, they're in the paddock having some lunch. And afterwards, Alberto sort of says, hey, you know what? I'd like to give that car a try. And it was a purely spontaneous decision. He didn't even have his gear with him. So he's wearing a suit, and he takes his jacket off, gets in the car, and he's like, I don't even have a helmet. And one of his other superstitions was his helmet. And as I mentioned, is famous for his pale blue racing helmet, which I have seen pictures of Ascari in, and it sort of, rang a bell to me. He borrows Castellotti's helmet and takes off. So there he is in his tie, his shirt sleeves, his trousers, and someone else's helmet. He takes off at Monza in this car, and so he emerges from a fast corner on the third lap. The car somersaults. He's thrown out of the car onto the track, and he passes away. And it happened at a high-speed corner, and I did not know this. They rearranged the corner shortly thereafter, and they renamed it in his honor. And that's why we have the Ascari chicane at Monza. It's where he passed. A reconfigured track now. It's not as a high-speed corner as it had been before. And they can talk about why the crash happened. There's all kinds of reasons that people have talked about. It's just horribly sad that a guy who wasn't even going to be racing that day had just survived 4 days earlier the Monaco situation, hops into the car and doesn't get a chance to get out.
Yeah, and like you said, they've never explained it. There's multiple theories out there. One was that it was only 4 days later, and he had delayed concussion, and he just blacked out and lost control of the car. There was another one that said, I didn't mean to laugh then, but his tie blew up into his face and caused him to miss the corner. Mike Hawthorne was interviewed and said that he felt that the tyres were at fault and they were too wide for the rim, and that had given the grip issues. Because essentially where the car basically skidded, you just don't lose it there. It's just not a place that any driver would lose it there, and never really been explained. The thing that's really freaky when we go back, especially to his kind of his superstitions and fear of numerology, the eerie coincidences between his own death and his father's death. So Antonio was killed on the 26th of July, 25. Alberto was on the 26th of May, 55, so the same day of the month. They both died at age 36, so the same number, 36 again. They both lost their life 4 days later from miraculous escapes. So both Antonio And Ascari had miraculous escapes, like the Monaco into the water, and then ended up dying 4 days later. But the one that really those are bad enough, but the one that then kicks it for me is both men, father and son, regarded their helmets as their lucky charm. And they were both killed the first time they drove on a circuit wearing someone else's helmet. I mean, that's mind-blown levels of eeriness. I mean... A, incredibly sad, but B, wow. I mean, how close can you get? That's just there's coincidence and there's eerie coincidence, but yeah.
And as we know, the early days of Formula One and motor racing at this time were incredibly dangerous. We've talked about other drivers who have tragically passed, but Castellotti, who had been testing the car previously, passed 2 years later, testing a new Ferrari. But then, as we said kind of earlier, you may not be a, quote, professional driver. I mean, that was his job. He got paid for it. But he didn't have, trainers and, physios and social media people and all these other things that people have now. And we talked about his weight. However, fame did come with this. And being the only, still to this day, Italian-born Ferrari champion, when they buried Alberto Ascari, everything else in Milan was forgotten that day. The city was in mourning and shock. 1 million people, it said, showed up for that funeral to watch his coffin pass. 1 million. In 1955. Like, how hard it was to travel around then? It's not like you hopped on, a high-speed train or grabbed a helicopter or,
Oh, yeah, like we all do. I mean, I grab a helicopter everywhere I go, Brian.
Well, I do. And so, anyway, it was just... The city, the country mourned an amazing driver. And Rob, talk a little bit about some of the things we read about them thinking about Alberto.
Yeah, I mean, actually, just before we move on, the image I've kind of got as well is that the funeral procession. They said it was just a completely kind of blacked out coffin, but with the light blue helmet resting on top of it, and like that must have been something to see. I mean. Not that you want to see it, but it must have been something. And yeah, I mean, the late, great Murray Walker said that he was Italy's greatest ever. His quote was, plump, dapper, and charming. Dominated Grand Prix racing in the early 50s. So yeah, he thought he was plump as well.
Ciccio.
Yeah. And Murray continued, said his pale blue helmet and his pale blue sleeveless shirt, he was a supreme stylist, always more comfortable at the front of a race. He preferred to dominate, and once he was in the lead, he made it look so easy, which was backed up by Enzo Ferrari, who said, when leading, he could not easily be overtaken. In fact, it was virtually impossible to overtake him. I mean, everyone just thought he was like the bee's knees, if bees actually have knees, but... If they do, then Ascari was the bee's knees.
So we have to do some stats as we talk about Alberto Ascari, and I have a bumper crop of stats for you here. SAP Stats Alberto Ascari edition. So, as I said already, the first multiple drivers champion in F1 in 52 and 53. Ascari remains, along with Schumacher, Ferrari's back-to-back world champions. But here's the thing, their sole Italian champion. He entered 32 Grands Prix. He won 13, which is a 40+% win clip. And that's in his career. And that's second behind Fangio, who we did a Vale's Tale about. And you know who third is? Jim Clark, who we also did a Vale's Tales about. So we've kind of, knowing a little bit about the back in the days, kind of walked our way into three of the greatest ever. From a Vale's Tales perspective. Ascari, I think, probably the least well-known. He had 14 pole positions, 12 fastest laps, 17 podiums. 53% of the time, he ended up on the podium. And he had 14 retirements, which is 43%. So I did a little math. And when you add that together, 97% of the time, Alberto Ascari finished on the podium or didn't finish.
Yeah, so if he wasn't let down... Basically, if he wasn't let down by his car, which back in the day... reliability was nowhere near what it is now. If the car didn't let him down, he put it on the podium every time.
Amazing. 68. He also ran 68 non-world championship races, but let's talk a little more about 52. 52, as I mentioned, it rivals Clark's 63 in the seasons we've reviewed, and there are others. We'll talk more about other amazing seasons as we do the dirty side. Highest percentage of wins in a season all time. Alberto Ascari, 75% of the race wins in 1952. The highest percentage of fastest laps in a season. Alberto Ascari, 75%, also in 52. Most consecutive fastest laps. 7 in a row. Alberto Ascari. 6 of them in 52, 1 of them in the beginning of 53. 100% of potential championship points in a season, 52. Most hat tricks in a season, 5, 52. Most consecutive laps in the lead, 304 laps in the lead in a row, 52, Belgian Grand Prix, and then the Dutch Grand Prix. And then here's just what really blew my mind, just to bring it back to a little bit more modern day. So I already mentioned, right, the most percentage of wins in a season. And we've talked about Max's raw number and going for 13. And then Paul and others, and we have even said the percentage is what matters, because back in the day you had less races. So Ascari leads 1952, 75% of races entered won. Number 2 all time is Schumacher's 2004 season, when he had 72% of wins. Number 3 is 1963, Jim Clark, 70%, that magical 63 season. But here's what's interesting. As of today, number 4, and again, if my math is right, Max Verstappen. He has 68.75% of the wins, 11 of 16 so far this season, ahead of Seb, Fangio, Schumacher, Hamilton, Clark, Vettel, Hamilton. So Max is doing something amazing. But when you look at the guy and the people in front of him, Clark, Schumacher, Ascari, that's really impressive company to keep in terms of dominating a season. And I would say that 1952 season with 75% of wins and everything else I highlighted has got to be one of the best seasons ever driven by anyone in Formula One.
And what can Max end up on if he wins? What do we got this year? 23, did you say, or is it? Are we down to
22? We lost Russia.
So he's won 11.
6 more.
We've got 6 more, so he could win 17 of 22, right?
I mean, he has to win every single one of the rest to do your little math there.
Yeah. If he does that, if he gets the we got 17 divided by 22, right? He'll get 77%. So he has to win every single race to go past Ascari. If he doesn't, he'll slot into the number 2 spot ahead of Schumacher if he say won 5 of the 6 remaining. So that just, when we think about how dominant Max is this year and how amazing that car is and the fusion of great driver with great car, he still has to win every single race of this season to become number 1 ahead of Ascari. That's what we're saying, right? If he fails to win just one of them, he isn't going to take that record.
And we know the number
of races,
competitors are different, and the cars and the travel and the yada yada yada. But I'm just saying, just because you don't know Alberto Ascari, well now you do, but because you didn't, don't let him not get the proper credit. Some double negative happened there, but you know what I'm trying to say. That's the dirty side, a heartfelt, invigorated conversation ruined by language.
But I mean, I loved diving into this. I've spent a lot of time on YouTube looking at old Ascari clips, watching Top Gear episodes, watching for anybody that was talking about him. I've kind of consumed over the past few days. So I love it when we pick a driver that we kind of know the name but don't know the story, and then when you go digging, you find like an amazing story. So thank you for picking Ascari, Brian, because it was really good fun, and I hope everyone that's listened has kind of enjoyed hearing about Ascari. What are we doing now?
Well, I think one thing we forgot to do, or we weren't able to do last week, because we did Rapid Fire Pod, given the football, was we didn't talk at all about the fantasy from Italy, and we need to highlight the winners.
That's right. Because we dared to record it 2 hours after the race had finished, and 2 hours isn't enough for the F1 supercomputer to crunch all the numbers.
I'm assuming there's a monkey and an abacus, but who knows? So from Monza in the Dirty Side League, first place Rowan D with DTS Drive to Spin, 289 points, mega. Followed by Stephen Yu, Vroomstappen. We've mentioned your team before, Stephen. Nice job. Balotelli 21, Red Bolino. We've also mentioned you. Came in third at 231 points. Andrew T, Alpha Taily. Andrew was our first half winner. Back on form, 224 points in 4th place. Your t-shirt should be arriving this week. Jim M., your neighbor, Guitar Hero, 217 points in 5th place. So give him a quick shout out because I want to hit 6th and 7th. We're going to 7th this week for a reason.
Jim, woo.
Nailed it. Man, when Rob's your buddy, you can count on him for support. 6th place, Joseph W. Can you hear the drums for Lando? 213. And then right behind that is our friend and founder of our Discord server, Lee, with Team Minimal Effort, 203 points. Shout out, Lee, and shout out the Dirty Side Discord. You should be joining us, people. It's a blast.
Yeah, you absolutely should. Because one thing you can do on the Discord channel as well as on Twitter is volunteer to go on the 100 Seconds of DRS, which is what Anthony did, and we caught up with him. And let's check in on how Anthony got on in 100 Seconds of DRS.
All right, we are super excited to have Dirty Sider Anthony on with us today. And Anthony, first off, huge shout out for listening to us ask for 100 Seconds of DRS volunteers and doing so on Twitter. So I would just tell all the other Dirty Siders who have thought about doing that, follow Anthony's lead. So Anthony, welcome, my friend.
Thank you, guys. Thank you. Great to be here. Thank you for all the great content.
Always. It's great to have you here. So Anthony, one of the things we always like to talk to, Dirty Siders about is their love of F1 and how they got into F1, because we're all F1 fans here. So for you, how did you get into F1? What was the beginning of your journey?
Yeah, so, during peak COVID, stumbled across Drive to Survive and really just been riding that wave the whole way through, watched all of that, got caught up, and then started watching the season once that started, and been obsessed with it ever since.
Now you're out on Long Island, correct? And so you kind of shared with us as we started, and I got to give Anthony a kudos here. He has a commute to work, but you consume more F1 content than anybody I know, and I love it. So how many podcasts roughly do you listen to weekly?
I would say at least 5 just F1 related podcasts I listen to.
That is amazing. And I know Rob has a follow-up here, but I'm going to do it for him. Would you say Dirty Side is, pretty much the top of the list?
Of course, you guys are at the top.
That's where I was going. You read my mind. Read my mind. That's where I was going. It's cool that you found it through Drive to Survive. As we were chatting beforehand, you kind of said, oh yeah, I know some people in the UK aren't a big fan of Drive to Survive. And I actually think it's worse than that, especially when you hang out on Twitter, is that there seems to be a community of folk that seem to think you're not a real F1 fan if you got into it through Drive to Survive. Like, you've got to have some badge that shows you've been watching it since 1950. I think that sucks. I think Drive to Survive has done a great job of bringing people like you into the sport. And if you're in it now and you love it, who cares if you've been in there since December? Everyone has to start somewhere, right? Yeah.
I love Drive to Survive. Season 4, and we were talking about this, a little bit over dramatized, but I love the behind the scenes thing, and I think it's great.
Yeah, I agree. I love to see a more human side to the drivers than just somebody in a seat.
Yeah.
I think it really brings out their character more. I mean, look at what became of Daniel Ricciardo. I mean, he's arguably the biggest driver in the sport, even though he doesn't have a seat next year.
Yeah. And everybody follows him and knows who he is, and a lot of that character. And he does have a great personality. At least it comes across as such. I mean, for all we know, we're getting duped, but
yeah, exactly.
You never know what you're seeing out there. But Danny Rick is one of my favorite drivers and had been before that. But watching him on Drive to Survive, when my wife started watching Drive to Survive with me, and I'm like, you gotta watch Danny Rick. He's hilarious. And so I love your point. I think it brings out that human side of the drivers really strongly.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the thing that I now think, like, I wish that something like that had been around, like, for years, is that we had Pit Lane Paul on once in one of our early episodes where he told us a story about Michael Schumacher and how Michael Schumacher would take part in the game that if you left your groin area unattended with your hands, he would just basically walk past and nad tap you, just punch you in the groin. Now, without something like behind the scenesy type thing, Schumacher was always portrayed as kind of like this stone cold machine of a man. Two machines come together, Schumacher and the car, and off it goes. And you never really got to know much personality. So I think I'm all for things like Drive to Survive, as long as they, like we said, cut the over dramatization out. So I think it's cool.
So
yeah, I agree.
I'm sorry. I do have a question though, and so how did you find the Dirty Side? One of your many, of course, your favorite of your many podcasts that you consume.
Actually, I found you guys through Twitter. I was just on F1 Twitter one day, and I saw you guys make a good comment on something, and I saw you guys were a podcast, and I was immediately interested to see what content you guys brought to the table.
We appreciate that.
Yeah, I mean it's great. You guys are my top listen every week. Love to hear you guys. Love 100 seconds of DRS. Loves the SAP stats. I know Rob's not a fan.
Oh, I love the SAP stats. I'm getting more into the jingle side of it now. We need to get, you don't play a musical instrument, do you, Anthony?
I play the drums here and there. I might lay a nice little beat, but I'm no producer or anything like that. But I might know a guy.
Well, I mean, seriously, if you wanted to take your phone and set it next to some drums one day and give us, 7 seconds of a riff, we'll use it.
I'll definitely try and work something out. If I think it's good, I'll send it in.
I'm starting to worry. I don't know if you did hear the Sandwich Rant song that got done by one of our listeners. I'm thinking he might have set the bar too high, and now people are scared to come in because it's kind of dropped off the entries since that one came in.
Yeah, I mean, that and the mariachi Formula One theme song, it's hard to live up to those expectations.
I'm sure I'm violating all kinds of copyrights on that because I found it somewhere on the side of the internet one day, and I'm like, oh boy, this is the greatest thing I've ever heard. So Anthony,
just wait for the cease and desist.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we cease and ignore those. So the question I have for you is last one before we get into the 100 seconds. Is, as a fan for the last year and a half of F1, like what's your favorite team, like constructor at this point that you watch? And I'm just curious where your alliance or allegiance has been built over that time, because it's been fascinating to see where the teams have been. So I'm kind of curious.
Yeah, so it might sound like a cop-out, but I'm a big Mercedes fan. I love Lewis Hamilton, seeing a black driver in the sport, and, me being a half minority, my mom being Dominican. It's amazing to see, somebody that looks like somebody I could have grown up with, doing this compared to, me growing up watching NASCAR a lot with my dad. It's just, primarily Caucasian male drivers driving the cars. They had Danica Patrick for a little while, but even that was short-lived.
Yeah.
So Lewis is what really, it was just amazing to see. And then, to then find out that he's the best potential driver ever made it even better. I only knew of his name and what he did. I didn't know how good he was until I started actually watching and digesting the sport to understand.
Oh, that's awesome.
Wow.
Okay, so you gravitated towards the character before you kind of understood the accomplishments. And that's pretty cool.
That's really cool. Lewis is one of my favorite drivers. And that's why I get honked off, because we don't swear here, when people say a lot of his achievements were the car. And now people are saying that about Max, also incorrect. So I think people, yes, the car is a factor in it, but he's an amazing driver. He's one of the greatest talents ever in F1.
It drives me mad because basically the best drivers will move towards the top teams, which will ultimately see the best drivers coupled with the best car. And as soon as they then get criticized for being just the car. It's unless you feel like unless Max or Lewis or any kind of top driver was driving around the back of the grid in a 3-wheel ride on mower and still winning, then no one would give them the credibility. I mean, you get, it's like any sport, the best quarterbacks get drafted to the best teams or make their way to the best teams, or in soccer, the best players get signed for the biggest clubs in the world. I mean, the cream rises to the top, so why is it a surprise that the best driver is in the best car? It just...
You could use a better analogy. Anthony's wearing a New York Yankees t-shirt. You said Aaron Judge, of course, is going to end up on the Yankees, right?
Yeah,
I have no idea. Yeah, I have no idea what that sentence just means that you just said, but yeah.
That's why we're America's leading Formula One podcast, is because some of us understand how sports work in America.
That's why I went with quarterback first. Come on, I didn't.
Yeah,
I said soccer.
I thought you were going to say hockey. I thought you were going to say the quarterback of the hockey team is the important one. That's where I thought you were going, buddy. Oh man! All right, Anthony. I've really enjoyed getting to know you, and I'm assuming you're now very excited for the 100 seconds of DRS quiz. And today I'll be asking the questions, and Rob will be attempting to work the timer, which is usually a struggle for him. So, Anthony, sir, are you ready?
Yes, sir. Let's do this.
I am also ready. Rob, count us in, please.
Oh, you are actually going to hand over to me to count me in. I thought you were going to count me in for you then. So anyway.
Well, I mean, someone's got to be competent on this side of the microphones.
It's not me. Right, here we go. In 3, 2, 1, go.
Anthony, what's the first poster you had on your bedroom wall?
Metallica.
Best F1 driver on the grid today?
Max Verstappen, unfortunately.
Favorite restaurant?
I'll go commercial. That way most people know it. Fridays.
All right. Who's the best young driver in F1? Maybe outside of Max.
I'll go George Russell over Lando.
Yeah, he's doing fantastic. What's your favorite F1 track?
Unpopular opinion, I love Singapore.
Oh, there's nothing wrong with that. Okay, very important. This is the highlight of the quiz. GIF or GIF?
It's GIF, and anybody that says GIF is... Or no, I'm sorry. Let me rephrase. It's GIF, not GIF. Whoever says GIF is thinking about peanut butter.
Yes, thank you. So, pulled it out of the fire there, Anthony. Mario or Luigi?
Mario.
Ferrari or Ford?
Ford.
If you could add a James Bond type gadget to an F1 car, what would it be?
Missiles.
Yes, very good. Sleep in or up early?
Up early.
Oh, good for you, listening to all the podcasts. Who do you think's the best F1 driver of all time?
Lewis Hamilton.
Love it. What's your least favorite television program?
Grey's Anatomy.
Oh, high five. Tires, interesting or not interesting?
Oh, interesting. And I know Rob hates it.
Yes,
and that's time.
This has been the best 100 seconds of DRS answer session ever.
Thank you.
We were going somewhere different with the GIF, but when you said GIF, I knew it. And tires, interesting. By the way, Grey's Anatomy. My wife still watches Grey's Anatomy. I think it's still on the air. And I walk in the room, it's like the same storylines from 15 years ago. But sorry.
How many doctors can you kill?
I don't know. I mean, I've actually never been to Seattle, but I'm assuming it's hit by a natural disaster or a plane crash every week, apparently.
Every week, and this hospital has the worst mortality rate in the country.
Can we add this to a question on 100 seconds? Grey's Anatomy, complete and total BS or not? Oh, yeah. Man. Anthony, thank you so very much for doing this. It was an absolute pleasure having you on, and it was just awesome to meet you, man. And like I said before, to all of the other Dirty Siders who are contemplating doing the 100 seconds of DRS, reach out like Anthony did. We'll have a lot of fun. So, Anthony, thanks, man, for joining us.
Yeah, thanks a lot. It was amazing to meet you, and just thanks for the support. Thanks for making us your number one choice on your commute.
Of course, man. Thank you guys so much for, keeping me interested and awake in the mornings. And if any of the Dirty Siders are, second guessing about DMing you guys like I was for a while, do it. It was worth it.
Thanks, Anthony.
Fantastic. Anthony, thank you again so much. And as I just said, that's a great testimonial for anyone who wants to be on the 100 Seconds of DRS at F1 Dirty Side on Twitter. You can slide right into our DMs. We will answer and set that up.
I love the fact that he was nervous about doing it, about maybe I will tweet them, maybe I won't, and
yeah,
and he did it, and
we had a great
he did it,
conversation.
and we had a blast, and we probably spent more time after we'd stopped recording talking to him than we did actually recording. So yeah, do it. Just if you listen, if you like the DRS, it's nothing big. Me and Brian aren't famous. Come on, have a chat, have fun.
You don't have
DRS.
helicopters? You don't have a helicopter, apparently?
Well, apparently not, but maybe you must be having the Dirty Side helicopter all the time. I think I need to have it.
Apparently I do. And that's it for this week. That was
it is, and we don't really know what's going to happen next week. We're going to make it up as we go along because we've got another gap week because... another week to survive without racing. At least next week we can definitely give you a preview of Singapore, and we can go into all the permutations of what Max will need in order to be able to take the title in Singapore. We promise it will be more than just that. We haven't quite worked out what it's going to be. If you'd like some content, then tweet us.
No, we have plans. We've got plan A and plan B and plan C and plan D, and like McLaren, we have plan G and plan E, and anyway.
can we go to Plan K? Question.
Yeah. Question. Yes, we can. Question. Anyway,
Right,
everybody, thank you so much for listening this week. We hope you enjoyed the Ascari Vales Tales. We honestly had a blast putting that together, and we will continue to always do these driver retrospectives and maybe adding people like Enzo Ferrari or Adrian Newey into the mix to learn more about them too.
Yeah. For Enzo and Nui are kind of names that we put forward. But yeah, in all seriousness, if there are names out there that people would like us to cover, we're quite happy to take listener suggestions. So if you've got someone you would like us to feature on Vales Tales, then hit us up at Twitter, join the Discord channel, throw it in there. And other than that, I think all that remains to say is keep it on the dirty side, and we will speak to you next week.
Be well, everybody.